Welcome back to the Jump Indeed. I'm Rachel Nichols, still joined by Mark Spears and our next guest, front office insider Bobby Marks. Glad to have you back on the show, Bobby. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Rachel.
All right, I want to get into DeMar DeRozan with you guys because he's an unrestricted free agent. And look, free agency starts in a week. DeRozan spoke to Shannon Sharpe on the Club Shay Shay podcast about what his priorities are. Here is what he said.
At this point, you gotta weigh out the opportunity of winning a championship kind of more. You know, especially with the career I had, I've been fortunate to make a lot of money.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But at this point, your ultimate goal is always to compete for a championship.
First of all, shouts to the Club Shay Shay set designer, because that's a very nice setup there. But Bobby, more importantly, what are your expectations for DeMar DeRozan in free agency?
Yeah, it's funny, Rachel. He is the one player that's kind of flown under the radar as far as we've heard, certainly Chris Paul's name and Kawhi Leonard. But DeMar DeRozan has flown under the radar. And I think there's two schools of thoughts as far as with him. It's the teams that have cap space that are playoff teams. So now you're looking at a team like New York, potentially Miami. But if you go to New York, is that a win now situation with RJ Barrett and Julius Randle? And can you maybe get another player to come with you? And I think the most logical situation is going to be trying to work out some type of sign and trade. The last 2 years, there's been 16 players sign and trade. I would circle the Lakers as a possible destination just because it fits. It fits as far as DeRozan wanting to go back home and playing for a championship level team. I think it fits because if you're San Antonio, can you recoup maybe a Kyle Kuzma back as far as instead of losing DeRozan for nothing? And it's just a matter of if you're the Lakers, as far as we've always talked about that hard cap, right? They'd be hard capped at $143 million. And then you got to kind of put your other free agents kind of in a pecking order here. But the Lakers, for me, is probably the most logical destination for DeMar DeRozan.
Yeah, add the Clippers to that, which is kind of interesting. I talked to someone close to DeMar today, and they said, look, San Antonio is still on the board, so don't count the Spurs out. But there's a lot of teams showing interest in DeMar, Lakers, Clippers, Knicks, Chicago. LA is certainly attractive. I went with him to his basketball camp in Compton. He does a lot back home. His father, God rest his soul, passed earlier this year, and his mom is still in Los Angeles. So going back to LA certainly is attractive for family reasons, to get back home, to be close to his family, and perhaps even do more in the community than he already has. But, so it ain't just the Lakers. The Clippers have some interest too.
Well, that is interesting. Remember, not so much this past season, but especially in the 2019-2020 season, we saw the Lakers and Clippers compete for a lot of players and, in fact, make a trade with each other. So that's always a little bit spicy. And certainly, DeMar has been so open about some of the struggles he has gone through, that his family has gone through. I think a lot of people would be rooting for him to go with either team, but just to be back in the LA area with his family. Very interesting to keep an eye on that. I also want to get to Bradley Beal, though, guys, because The Athletic is reporting he is mulling his future ahead of Thursday's draft. Mark, are the Wizards under pressure to get an answer from Bradley before draft night so they can kind of decide what they're doing here?
Well, I certainly think it would behoove them to know definitively what he wants to do. But I think Bradley has $181 million worth of reasons to hold tight and maybe figure everything out later. I'm told as of this morning, there has been no request, even though there's been a lot of speculation that such could take place. We're a couple days before the draft. Obviously, he would be a very, very coveted piece. You hear his name even around Golden State, where they have a lot of assets to move. But as of right now, and I know he has a really good relationship with general manager Tommy Shepard, and they're pretty open and honest with each other. No trade requests from Beal at this moment.
Yeah, Rachel, and I think the pressure on Washington was right when the season ended, right when they lost in the first round to Philadelphia. And their general manager, Tommy Shepard, came out and said, this is not a run it back type team, right? We're not going to bring back some of the same faces that were on the roster, and they've got 5 or 6 free agents, including players like Robin Lopez, Ish Smith. So for Beal, I think the next couple weeks are going to be critical from the Wizards. It's similar to what we're going to see in Portland, right? As far as the pressure on the organizations to try to build a championship level team. And when you have Beal and Russell Westbrook making $75 to $80 million of your salary, it is going to present a challenge. And as Mark said, with that extension, he's eligible to sign a $180 million extension starting on October 1st. He can get $170 million from another team in the offseason with cap space. So there's not much of an advantage. The advantage comes with that 5 years, $235 million contract that he can sign with Washington, or perhaps if he's traded during the season with his new team.
Yeah, and that's certainly what players on other teams are going to be saying to him. Hey, you can pretty much get almost as much money with us. And we talk about Team USA and the Olympics being such strong recruiting ground. Mark, you mentioned Golden State. I don't know if during training camp, Draymond was in Bradley Beal's ear saying, hey, friend.
You know he was.
Hey,
you know he is.
Hey. Now, Bradley, of course, unfortunately went into the health and safety protocol, so he did not make the trip to Tokyo. He is not with these guys on the trip, but he was with them for 2 weeks in Las Vegas. There's a lot of names that are on a lot of teams that could use a Bradley Beal. So I don't know what conversations were happening behind the scenes. Bobby, I do want to ask you, though, you mentioned some of these contract numbers Bradley is eligible for. As Mark said, he's got 181 million reasons to stay in D.C. But what about from the D.C. side? The last Supermax they gave out was to John Wall. We saw how that worked out. They're still paying Russell Westbrook, who is on a Supermax that he signed in Oklahoma City. Are they really in position? Do they feel like they want to commit that much money to Bradley Beal for these next 5 years if Beal gives them the opportunity to do so?
Yeah, I think if Bradley Beal walked into Tommy Shepard's office today and said, I want to sign that $100 million extension, or let's play it out and I will put my name to 235, I think Tommy would give him a nice handshake agreement. And I think
and a pen.
The Supermax gets, we know the Supermax gets tricky because, Rachel, what happens is that teams are paying usually for the past, not much for what the future is. And when we saw it with Chris Paul, when we get to years 4 and 5 and you're paying a guy $45 to $50 million and maybe the production is not there, it's tough to continue to build the team. But I think if Bradley Beal gives his commitment to Washington, I think they will gladly sign on the dotted line there.
Well, the good thing with Beal is that he's still younger than a lot of people realize he is. He does have 5 years projected of production ahead of him. And it does pain me to say this because it's my hometown, but Washington, D.C. just has not been a free agent destination. So if you've got a guy like Bradley Beal, I got to think you will do everything and pay anything to keep him. Right, Mark?
And Rachel, ironically, just before the pandemic hit, a couple of weeks before, I was in San Francisco, the home of the Warriors, having lunch with Bradley Beal, doing an interview with him. And the one thing that he said is he loves Washington. He wants to have a career in Washington. He wants to have his jersey retired in Washington. He wants to be a Wes Unseld type figure with the organization. And perhaps what we just saw from Giannis sticking with it with Milwaukee could give him more motivation to stay in Washington and try to continue his legacy there.
Well, look, we've got the Giannis example on one hand. You've got Draymond Green possibly in your year during training camp. We saw what Draymond Green was able to convince Kevin Durant to do. Yeah, maybe I should. I'm trying to be responsible and say possibly, even though we all know it was pretty likely. All right, Bobby, thank you so much for joining us today. You will continue to be with us as free agency approaches. We are looking forward to that. Mark, you and I are going to go into this next segment, and I wanted to show you what the Jump recommends for today because Mark has a great story up on LSU guard Cameron Thomas and how his mother helped him.
Hey, man, I need some Antonio McDyess and some Kenyon Martin. I need some of those, too.
I feel we could make this into a top 10 list from a top 5. That might be a challenge for the guys for later in the week. But first, we got to get to this because, gentlemen, we are 1 week away from free agency, which means between that and the draft, it is also trade season. Ben Simmons, of course, a name that's been on the lips of a lot of front office folks around the league. In fact, Woj reporting trade talks around Simmons are expected to indeed heat up this week. So, Tim, what is the best situation for Ben Simmons? And on the flip side, your old friend Daryl Morey, in terms of the Sixers, what they want to get out of this?
The situation, the scenario that's always made sense for me is some sort of CJ McCollum for Ben Simmons framework. And they can argue about, who has to throw in what. But I think CJ McCollum would give the Sixers that scoring kind of secondary playmaking guard who could really help Joel Embiid. And I want to see Ben Simmons in more of a Draymond Green role. Stop putting him in a position where he's the primary playmaker, where he's the point guard. Let him be that secondary playmaker, that power forward with Dame Lillard, an elite, obviously deep-range shooter, pick-and-roll player, great leader that I think could help get his confidence up. Of course, the problem there is how much longer is Dame Lillard going to be in Portland?
Mark?
Well, David Fredman, I don't know if you guys know him, a longtime NBA executive, told me once, he'd never get too high or too low about how somebody plays in the postseason. I think Ben Simmons is still a great player, will be a great player. He's in Los Angeles right now, working with a Clutch Sports appointed shooting coach. Here in the Sixers are getting a shooting coach as well. He's in good mental spirits, working on his game in LA. He didn't get a lot of time with Doc Rivers. There was no training camp, pandemic shortened season. Season.
Just throw that in there too.
I think you got to run it back with Doc. I know Doc likes him a lot, and see what happens the second time around. I think they need more time together.
Doc didn't like him too much in his post-game press conference when they got eliminated. And Joel Embiid did not exactly indicate some eagerness to run it back.
In terms of Embiid, you don't hate on your teammate, man. I don't like that.
But he did, and it's his franchise, and we've got to recognize those as realities. Is
that the kind of leader you want to play with, though?
Listen, I'm
teammates' legs out when he has a bad series.
We can discuss blame, but I just think that it is in the best interest of all parties for Ben Simmons to be playing elsewhere sooner than later. And whether a deal that makes sense materializes now or during the season, I would be surprised if he's a Philadelphia 76er next postseason.
Okay, but that begs the question then, Tim, and I don't disagree with you that, hey, it might be nice to get that clean palette, but at what cost, right? Because Mark's right. The playoff performance Ben had, it left a taste in enough people's mouths that it's a little bit of a sell-low situation. And if you're a franchise, you don't want to be in a sell-low situation. So, Mark, how would you balance those things? How would you balance the idea of getting a fresh start with your team right from the beginning of training camp, if you do bring in someone else for Ben, having Ben out of there, having this new person in there, being able to work the whole season and get him cohesion for the playoffs, versus the fact that you will just probably not get the value for Ben Simmons this week that you would 3 or 4 months into the season when people have gotten the chance to see him work again and succeed the way he did during the regular season last year.
Yeah, no, the Sixers haven't had enough time to take a deep breath and really see if this is something they want to do and not make an emotional decision. I'm sure there's a lot of teams that would love to have Ben Simmons and give that maybe Ben feels like it's time for me to go and try something new. But I think people need to just calm down. I mean, this dude is still a pretty great player. He had a bad series. Have some patience with it. That's just me. I don't know. Maybe I'm an optimist.
And we're back to panic or patience again. Here's the thing. And you don't want to sell for pennies on the dollar. You do need to get star value in return. And you can't, it's not about picks because you're trying to capitalize on Joel Embiid's prime, but you can't be too patient when you have Joel Embiid, one of the top 3, 5, make that argument, whatever, players in the NBA in his prime. You've got a window you've got to capitalize on. And I just think they've reached their peak with Ben Simmons as his co-star.
It'll be very interesting to see not only what move they make, but when they do it. Tim, thank you so much for joining us today. You will be all over ESPN's NBA coverage all week with the draft and free agency coming up because there's like 6 teams that you are in charge of coverage for our NBA group. So thank you for your time today, and we'll see you not too long from now.
Always a pleasure.
All right, everyone else, stick with us. DeMar DeRozan says it's all about winning when it comes to his free agency decision. Where would he fit well then? Our cap expert, Bobby Marks, is going to join me and Mark Spears right after this break.
Product placement right there.
There you
go.
Like
that, George.
All right. Welcome back to The Jump. All right, let's get to the Lakers here. It's something I talk about just as much, if not more, than MMA in the MMA world right now. They made their first move in what will be a busy offseason by extending a qualifying offer to second-year guard Talen Horton-Tucker. Also, the Los Angeles Times is reporting that DeMar DeRozan and Kyle Lowry both have the Lakers on their radar ahead of free agency. So, Ramona, What are realistic expectations for the Lakers this offseason?
Well, the step with Talen Horton-Tucker is that they had to do that so that he becomes a restricted free agent. The question is, how far are they willing to go in terms of extending him and how much money they're going to pay him? Because other teams can sign him to a deal which would be very uncomfortable for the Lakers in the way that they backload that contract and the way they set up the contract. DeMar DeRozan, LA kid, not surprising to me at all that he would be interested in the Lakers. Same thing with Kyle Lowry, but for how much? Because it's difficult for them to pay anything more than the way this works. The salary cap math works for the Lakers is if Montrezl Harrell picks up his player option, he has until July 31st to do that. If he opts into his deal, they've used their mid-level exception, which
it's
means
about nine-ish.
Yeah, nine-ish. Yeah. They can't pay anybody more than $5.9 million. That's a pretty significant pay cut for either of those two guys, which means they would likely have to acquire them via sign and trade. Now, Alex Caruso, unrestricted free agent. Andre Drummond, unrestricted free agent. Dennis Schroeder, unrestricted free agent. Now, the Lakers tried to keep Schroeder. Obviously, during the year, they offered him several different contracts. He thinks he can get more. My understanding, I don't know that he can elsewhere. I'm not sure where the home would be for him elsewhere. You've heard New York, Chicago. I don't know if that will materialize in the way that we thought it might during the year. And so the Lakers may end up getting a discount to keep Schroeder. I think they have other opportunities in terms of trades lined up that they can push those buttons. This is what you do in a front office. You call around the league, you have things set up, and decide which doors to walk through. So the first point where we find out what the Lakers are going to do this offseason comes at the draft. I think they have a couple of deals that they could potentially move forward on to acquire either a point guard or help around the roster. But Rob Pelinka and his staff have been working. Last year was obviously a disappointment for the Lakers and the Heat, the two teams that went to the finals. And they have ambitions to get right back there. If you have LeBron James, Anthony Davis on your roster, you are a championship team. So I expect the Lakers to be active. I think of the two you mentioned, DeRozan and Lowry, I think Lowry is more of an option than DeRozan just because he doesn't seem to fit. He doesn't necessarily fit Toronto's long-term plans anymore. Well,
and real quick before Perk goes, they need a secondary playmaker, right? Like, I don't think there's any question about that. So Lowry fits that more so than DeRozan. Perk, what do you think the expectation should be for the Lakers here?
Well, first of all, the Lakers need to be crying tears of joy that Dennis Schroeder didn't take the extension after the way he played this postseason, and they need to be trying to find a home from him, either with a sign or trade or get off his salary. And then next, they need to get rid of Kyle Kuzma. Look, Kyle Kuzma is just not going to figure out a way how to play winning basketball. I'm tired of watching them play. I know guys around the league and on that team are tired of being a part of what he's been bringing to the table. But long as you have LeBron James and long as you have Anthony Davis, you can fill in those spots. Look, we have to remember, both of those guys were not healthy. We also have to remember that before LeBron James got injured, he was playing at an MVP level. Yes, at year 18. I believe that Anthony Davis is going to come back on a mission. Matter of fact, I'm predicting right now that he's going to be the one to win MVP next season. He sees all the slander. He's hearing everything about Giannis. He's very quiet at the moment. And from what I'm hearing, he's working his tail off behind the scenes. So, look, the Lakers got to do something, but I would not panic if I'm a Lakers fan because you still have LeBron James and Anthony Davis. You could fill in the pieces. DeMar DeRozan and Kyle Lowry will fit just well. If you could sign and trade and the Wizards would take on Kuzma and Dennis Schroeder and you get back Russell Westbrook, then do your thing. What happened? What's that, George? I can't see.
I wrote it down, so that way we have a record of this. You said AD MVP.
Yeah,
it says
fine.
Perk AD MVP.
Yeah. I believe so.
Okay. I just want to make sure we document this stuff with you.
Well, we have to always remember who came into the league at the same time, who won, who was up for shoe deals at the same time. Giannis and Anthony Davis have a lot in common there. And Anthony Davis actually won a title before Giannis did. Okay, let's remember that. But Giannis got a signature shoe deal before AD. And there's a competitiveness. So I know what you're talking about there, Perk. And when you didn't do it, and you heard all this year, Anthony Davis obviously didn't have a good finish to the year. He didn't have a good year in general. So if he's motivated, that's all the Lakers need to hear. That's all they need to hear. LeBron and AD is enough as long as they're motivated and healthy.
We'll see. It is going to be a fascinating offseason, as I continue to say that throughout the show. All right, coming up next, speaking of the offseason, there are rumors that the Cavs are looking to move Kevin.
Not all this the good thing about all this is that he could rap as well.
Oh, he can. All right, then. Now, he just needs to learn who Alex Rodriguez is because he's part owner of the team.
Hey, he's the name on your check.
So there you go. You just got to learn that, Ant-Man, and you'll be all right. But Ant-Man was number one on our list. He was unbelievable on that play and all season. All right, let's stick with the draft and talk about the Golden State Warriors. According to Marcus Thompson from The Athletic, Bradley Beal and Pascal Siakam are atop the Warriors' wish list should those guys become available. The Warriors have the number 7 and 14 pick in the upcoming draft and have missed the playoffs the last 2 seasons. Let's take a look at the Warriors' core here and their ages, more importantly. They're in win-now mode, so they have the assets, but they also have a little ticking clock here. So, Ramona, how should they approach the draft?
Well, look, the Warriors have been trying to be the Spurs, okay? That was their idea of how they were going to present themselves. You have Steph, Clay, and Draymond is the older version. Then you have the younger version with Wiggins and Wiseman and Jordan Poole. They come along and take over for the 3 players as they get older. It's a nice idea. But you also have Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, and Draymond Green, who want to win now and are ready and theoretically going to be all healthy together this year. And their timeline is different. And I don't know that you can wait for those young kids to develop and take a chance on not having a championship team around Steph Curry when he's still playing at an MVP season. So they have interesting choices to make. I think that Marcus Thompson is as well sourced on the Warriors as any reporter out there. So I have no reason to doubt what his reporting is there. I think the issue with Beal is he available? That's what everybody in the league wants to know. He has to give some signal of what his intentions are long-term in Washington.
That's it.
For them to make a decision, for Russell Westbrook to make a decision, Russell wasn't under contract, but if Beal was not going to commit long-term, then I think that is in play as well. So we need to know where Bradley Beal stands, being the Wizards, the rest of the league, everybody else, because I don't know that he's available yet. So at number 7, I think they have some really good options there. It would have been more interesting if they were in the top 5, but Davion Mitchell is a kid to watch from Baylor. Really good defensive player. They're having him in for a second workout pretty soon. I think he fits he's a young player. He would fit that timeline where you have the 3 young guys and then you have the 3 older guys. That he fits more with that timeline. But he's also a good enough defensive player, and that's something that they really needed last season, and that's the type of player that the Warriors have been built around. The only thing he isn't is tall, but he's a very good, tough defensive player. George, I liked your comparison with Davion Mitchell, sort of like a defensive version of Donovan Mitchell. Yeah,
bodies are very similar. Davion is certainly impressive. Perk, what do you think of the Warriors situation?
Well, look, this is a deep draft, and you know this is one of my favorite times of the year, but no one in this draft is going to help the Warriors and make them a contender right now and help them get over the hump. So with that being said, the most important player on this team, the most important player to this franchise in that franchise history is who? Steph Curry.
Yep.
Steph Curry is coming up for what? A contract extension. Like, we're talking about Damian Lillard and what he wants as far as with Portland, and he's sitting back and he's waiting and evaluating the front office to see if they're going to make the right moves. You don't think Steph Curry is doing the same right now? He wants to win. He don't wants to go back through that stage where he had to baby Kelly Oubre. He don't want to go back to that stage where he had to baby and show Andrew Wiggins the way, and even Wiseman. You have to bring in a veteran. You have to bring in a guy that's going to come in and have an immediate impact on the organization to keep the most important guy healthy and make sure that he signs that contract and be a Warrior for life.
Now, Perk, Ramona brought up an interesting point about Bradley Beal, which is Bradley's got to say, hey, I want to go somewhere else, right? But it's interesting, and Beal is an amazing player, but we're kind of sleeping on Spicy P as part of this discussion in Marcus Thompson's story in The Athletic. I actually like the Pascal Siakam fit on this Warriors team, perhaps even more so than I like Bradley Beal. That, of course, assuming we eventually get to relative normal health with Klay Thompson. But Perk, what do you make of the potential situation if they had to choose one? Let's just, for argument's sake, say they could pick one or the other, Beal or Siakam. Which one do you think is a better fit?
Well, I'm going with Pascal Siakam. I'm going with a guy that has the experience of actually winning the championship. Give me that 6'9", 6'10", versatile guy, and give me a guy that you could put alongside Draymond Green, that he could put that dog into him. And look, Pascal is so versatile that you actually probably could play him at the 5 and go small. He could be a lot. Threat at the basket. We have witnessed him on the biggest stage rise to the occasion. Remember game 1, he gave Draymond Green 32 points. We remember that on 12 for 16 to 18 shooting in game 1 of the finals. So I like the addition of Pascal Siakam if they could get him.
Yeah, look, the Raptors have to want to trade him. He had a bad year.
Right.
So I don't think that's when you want to trade a guy. The Raptors are a really interesting spot at number 4 because Masai Ujiri's situation is still out there. He hasn't signed an extension yet, and his contract's kind of lapsed, so he's just sort of working. I know they've had a lot of discussions. I don't think he's going anywhere, but who's running your franchise right now?
There's so much drama.
He's running the draft for him.
In the NBA every offseason. Even when we thought this was going to be a sleepy offseason. Look how this has turned out.
Yep.
All right. Coming up next here on The Jump, the excitement is back in the Garden after the Knicks' first playoff berth in 8 years. Yes, producer Steve, I said that. The Knicks and GM Scott Perry agreed to a 2-year extension. Is this something, nothing, or everything? We will discuss it all next.
I want to be an NBA player.
It only matters where your heart's at.
I'm going to do whatever it takes to help my team win, and I'm going to win the MVP.
Make the impossible doable. I just want you to know you could be far from the usual. Anything you want, you can get it. Chase your dreams like you really can't lose.
Did it. Don't let nobody tell you what you can be and what you cannot do.
So follow your dream.
All right, welcome back to The Jump. I'm George Sedano in for Rachel Nichols. Still here with Perk and Ramona. So we saw Giannis there. So let's play The Jump's oldest game. Something, nothing, or everything. And we start with Giannis, who struggled at times in the playoffs with his free throw shooting. We all remember fans on the road counting 1, 2, 3, you get it, while Giannis was at the free throw line. So he imitated that for the Milwaukee fans in yesterday's parade. So Perk, is Giannis having some fun at the expense of being trolled at the free throw line? Something, nothing, or everything?
It's everything, for the simple fact that when you're a champion, you get to do things like this. When you've been trolled by the fans and they count down 10, 9, 8, look, he could do whatever the hell he wants and piss everybody off. And I love every single thing about it, because when I was a champion, I rubbed it in people's face and I wanted to make the haters so mad. Do your thing, Giannis. This is everything.
Yeah, I'm going to say it's everything, too, just because he made his free throws in that last game, 17 and 19 in that game 6. So you get to do that, not just because you won, but because you made those free throws. And I think when you have something like this, you can be Ben Simmons or you can be Giannis, okay? Ben Simmons struggles with his free throws, too, and doesn't like to talk about it, doesn't like to laugh about it, doesn't think any of it's funny. He also hasn't figured out how to make them when he needs to. Giannis has put himself out there. He continues to try. He continues to do things. Sometimes he makes them, sometimes he doesn't. But he's also laughing about it now. That's huge, to be able to laugh at yourself.
And by the way, kudos to Giannis in this regard. He didn't let that affect him at home, because a lot of his shooting woes at the free throw line were on the road, where he shot under 50% this postseason. And at home, he shot almost 80%. So he didn't let that affect him when he went home. All right, next up. And by the way, of course, it's everything. All right, next up, we have Knicks GM Scott Perry. After the Knicks made the playoffs for the first time in 8 seasons, they also landed home court in the first round as well. Got to give them their props. Perry was extended on a multi-year deal, according to The Athletic. So, Ramona, Scott Perry being extended. Is this something, nothing, or everything?
I like the action shots for the GM with the phone. Right, that's a good action shot. Yeah. I think that's something. Look, Scott took over under the previous regime. Do you know how rare it is to be able to keep your job with a whole new regime that comes in? And they kept him there because he's the guy who went out and got Julius Randle. He's the guy who pivoted when they realized they weren't getting Kyrie and Kevin Durant together. He pivoted. He went and got Bobby Portis. He went and got Julius Randle. He reloaded with Taj Gibson. I think he's a very valuable member of that front office in constructing that team, but also in keeping that team together. The players on that team like Scott. They trust him. He's the one they signed with. It's a good sign for Scott, who this offer's been on the table for a couple of months here. I think Scott was in demand and talking to other teams about running a franchise himself again. That didn't materialize, so the Knicks just kept him here as the general manager under Leon Rose. But Scott's a name you're going to hear again for other general manager openings that are coming up.
Well, I'm going with everything again on this Friday for the simple fact that it's showing a lot of character throughout the organization, right? When you go out and you hire a guy like Leon Rose and you hire World Wide West and Scott Perry has already been there, it just shows me that those guys also value him along with Dolan that values him, along with Tom Thibodeau, along with those players. So for him to get that extension and you have other guys that have come into the organization and one is ahead of you for as calling the shots, it just shows great character all across the board. And I can't believe that we're sitting up here right now, right before the draft, right before the free agency, and we're talking great about the New York Knicks. Times have really changed. Times have really changed.
To your point, Perk, I have spent many a time over the last 15 or 20 years, maybe making a joke or two about the New York Knicks. So kudos to them. They have done a great job here moving forward. They've got some real continuity. They've got a front office that knows what they're doing. And for the first time in a very long time, we should be positive about the Knicks, and that is a good thing for sure. All right, lastly, we have, and so it is everything as well. We're agreeing way too much here. All right, lastly, we have CJ McCollum, whose name has been in trade rumors after a first-round exit here in the playoffs most recently. So Jason Quick, longtime Portland beat writer with The Athletic, reports that the Blazers have been offered high draft picks for CJ McCollum, but have refused. So, Perk, is this something, nothing, or everything?
You know what? It's everything, because this is what they're telling us. They're telling us that we don't want young guys, but C.J. McCollum is on the table. We want something back in return, some type of veteran guy like a Bradley Beal or something to that nature. So this is everything, because they basically are coming out and telling C.J. McCollum that, hey, you're on the trading block. They're letting the world know that he's a piece that they're considering moving.
I'm going to say this is absolutely nothing, because if they were thinking of moving C.J. McCollum for a draft pick, you can be thinking of moving Dame Lillard next, because you can't trade C.J. for somebody like that for a draft pick.
Right.
That signals a rebuild. That signals we're getting younger. That signals I'm not getting Dame any help. C.J. McCollum is a guy that can play. He's one of he's been there together with him most of the time. Dame's been there. He's a great fit there. If they're going to trade him, they need to get somebody who can play now, not a draft pick that they can draft and develop. Because Dame Lillard wants to win now. He's impatient. I think that's been fairly clear in all of his messaging on social media and whatnot this summer. I think they should be turning down draft pick offers for him.
All right, so I'm going to disagree with both of you. I'm going to say this is everything, okay? And the reason I'm going to say is everything is Dame.
That's
is
what
that what
I
you
said,
Perk?
Joe.
Oh, I'm sorry, my bad, Big Perk. Okay, I thought you said something. Okay, so I agree with Big Perk. I do think it's everything, because Dame Lillard is the centerpiece of the Portland Trail Blazers. There is no doubt about that. He is Mr. Portland at this point as well. If they lose Dame Lillard in some way, shape, or form, and I think that this is all tied into that, I think that the franchise has to start completely over. And perhaps someone like Neil O'Shea is also under the gun here in a situation where he needs to make a move to satisfy the fact that Damian Lillard is potentially thinking about other opportunities. At the very least, he's got to be at least thinking about it.
Can I say a word about Neil O'Shea?
Yeah?
In 2011, Neil O'Shea was the general manager of the Clippers when they had the trade for Chris Paul on the 5-foot line for about a week. Remember how long that took? Okay, after the first trade for Chris Paul, the Lakers was vetoed. They came back around to the Clippers, and he held out for a week, knowing that Chris Paul was right there, because he didn't want to give up an extra pick, an extra player in that trade, because New Orleans asked for like one more asset. And he said, no, it's just one asset too much. He held on, and they end up getting Chris Paul and not giving up that extra asset. So in terms of poker face, in terms of just intestinal fortitude there to hold on to your players and not make a deal until you're ready to do it, I've seen it.
No, I get it, but here's the thing.
Well, he don't have time. He better not have that poker face right now.
Did he have time in 2011 with the Clippers?
Yeah.
You know? A whole week went by.
Yeah, but a different circumstance, I would say. Yeah, I would say a different circumstance because I don't think they were under the gun to lose their best player in that situation.
Dame's under contract. He didn't have to go anywhere.
I understand, but he seems disgruntled, is what I would say, or at least not necessarily as in love with the situation as he has previously. Maybe not disgruntled. I'll take that back.
Look, you need to get Dame some help, but you do it on your time and you do it when you feel good about that move because you only get one chance to make this right. I mean, you can't try 3 things and hope one of them works. You have to really be strategic and smart about how you make these decisions, and I think that's the issue here in Portland is everybody wants you to do it right now. Everybody wants that trade to happen tomorrow or the next day so that they can have closure, but you make that trade when you're good and ready.
Yeah, but Ramona, it could turn out to be a disaster like it happened with the Rockets, right? They wanted to do things on their terms, and we saw what happened with that. They barely won 20 games this season. So with that being said is if you have a disgruntled superstar and he don't want to be there, and this is a guy that has laid it on the line for this Portland Trailblazer team for the last 9 years. I'm not saying that a team owes you anything, but the least you could do is hear him out. And if Damian Lillard wants out, it would be in your best interest to put him in a place where he want to be. This is a loyal guy, respectful guy with great character, and he's not carrying himself like James Harden was. So
I agree
I'm
with
just saying,
Perk, I agree with you, but Dame has not said I want out. He just went on the record to say, I'm not saying that right now. He's saying I want help.
Right.
And I think getting help, you have all summer. I agree with you. You can't wait until the season. You can't do the thing the Rockets did with Harden, but I think you have all summer to get him some help in the way that they deem best for their
right.
team.
And CJ McCollum is the best asset that they have, perhaps, in trying to get him some help. So getting him for first rounders or draft picks, that's not going to help. To your point, Ramona, earlier for sure. But to CJ, real quick, man, I saw you tweeting out that charcuterie plate the other day. We were messing with you on the radio show, Sedano, LZ, and Cap on 710 ESPN. You need to get more meat on there, man. Less cheese. Less crackers. We need some more meat on there.
Did you not just see 30
some capicola, some mortadella, some prosciutto. Hey. Come on, man. I'm trying to help you, CJ. You got the wine. You got sort of the right mix, but you need more meat, less crackers on there. All right, we're done here. Coming up, we know who the Lakers are built around, but what are realistic expectations for what type of roster they can build around LeBron and AD? We'll get to that in a second. But first, here's what the Jump recommends for today. On ESPN Plus, check out the best bets for the Olympics. Should you take Team USA to win the gold? How about them as a 12-point favorite against France on